Or what are we getting in return?
With in-depth analysis and experts interviews, Hard Facts delivers the truth that others dare not to reveal. Tune into Hard Facts every weekday, 3 to 6 p.m. and arm yourself with the knowledge you need to navigate today's complex world. Hard Facts, where the truth always prevails.
99.3 Nigeria Info.
Let's talk.
In a world where misinformation runs rampant, one show stands apart from the rest. Get ready to embrace the truth as we bring you the most hard-hitting stories and unveil the real facts. Welcome to Hard Facts.
I am Maryann Okon, and this is Hard Facts, where we separate truth from fiction. We're passionate about the hard-hitting stories that matter. Get ready to challenge your perception and discover the real world. Let's dive deep into the issues that affect our communities, revealing the untold stories and giving you a voice. No sensationalism, no bias, just raw, unadulterated truth. I am committed to delivering news without compromise. Hard facts as we know them, when we know them, and how they affect you. Every Monday through to Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. This will be your most authentic news experience starting now on 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk. Well, you can take the girl out of the radio, but you can never take the radio out of the girl. Welcome. This is Hard Facts, 99.3 Nigeria Info. How are you doing, Lagos? Well, it feels good to be back. And yes, thank you for all the messages, all the amazing, thoughtful messages that you guys sent. And some people were like, come back. What is it? I am back. I hope that you've had a great week. And into the new week. Well, it's already Thursday. My goodness. Have you seen how fast February has been running? Because I've been thinking, like, before you know it, it's lunchtime. Before you know it, it's night. And before you know it, it's another day. Like, where's February going? Well, it's over. And it's a leap year. I've got a very good friend who's born on February 29. And every single year, when we want to say happy birthday to him on the 28th, he's like, no, that's not my birthday. And so we call him a teenager because he's probably about 16 years old since he was born. He's about 30 something years old, but he's only celebrated 16 birthdays. So I just want to say happy birthday to my very good friend Messoin Barabi. He just got married, and yeah, leap year babies, every leap year baby out there, happy birthday. Welcome to Hard Facts. Yes, this is an abridged version of the show. My name is Maryann Okon, by the way, and this will be your most authentic news experience, like I always say, and you can take that to the bank. Yes, of course, this is the nation's #1 talk news and sports radio station, 99.3 Nigeria Info, and we're taking you from here to the rest of the world, because we're going to be talking not the big stories today, yes, but something that's big and affects all of us. When I say all of us, me, you, everyone who's interested in the news, especially journalists. We're going to be talking about journalist safety across the world, and my guest is going to be joining me via Zoom in a bit, talking to me from the headquarters of the ICFJ, I beg your pardon. It's the International Committee on Safety of Journalists. Jonathan is joining me right now via Zoom. And we're going to be talking about one of the most, or the least talked about things. Because, you know, in this part of the world, we're always saying, oh, you journalists are not doing your jobs. You're not investigating enough. You're not going into the field. We need more investigative journalists. But then the truth to it, it's all fine and dandy. Don't get me wrong. I love my job. I always tell people it's the best job in the whole world. I don't know about any other job. But the downside is that a lot of us die in the field, and sometimes it goes underreported. Sometimes nothing's done about it. Maybe the government visits your family and gives them a little, amount of money, and condoles with them, and that's it. But nobody really follows through to, get to the end of it. I still remember the man who went into an embassy, a journalist, and then didn't come out. Turkey kept saying, oh, the Saudi government had a hand in it. But until today, Jamal Khashoggi, if I got that name right, yes, is also one of those journalists who's just gone missing and nothing's been said about it. But I said all of this to say welcome to my guest who's just joining us right now via Zoom. Jonathan Rozen is joining me. He is a senior researcher he's also covering the African program. He's the Cheshire, I hope I got that pronunciation correctly, Principal Program Africa Committee to Protect Journalists. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us, and I do appreciate that you still joined us even when you realized that it wasn't Sheriff that was going to be doing the interview. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. Jonathan, I started the conversation this afternoon laying that background because people expect a lot from us as journalists, to do our jobs a certain way. And especially if people are desperate, for good governance or sometimes to deal with corruption, the journalists are the people that, in quote, in these parts of the world, is the hope for the common person. And so there's a lot of responsibilities that's put on us. But then nobody really thinks or stops to think about, some of the downsides to it, some of the negatives that come with doing our jobs. And that's why you and I are here to have a conversation. So let me start by asking about press freedom, in especially in Nigeria, because I know that your committee covers all over the world. As an organization that has monitored activities of, journalists and government's disposition towards journalists globally, could you tell us how you describe Nigeria's government's record as regards press freedom?
Certainly, yeah, and maybe I'll just give your audience a brief overview of the Committee to Protect Journalists and our work a little bit before I discuss our work on Nigeria. CPJ as an organization has been around since 1981. We are dedicated to research, advocacy, and emergency response for journalists. That means that all over the world, whenever journalists are attacked or imprisoned or where laws are passed that are going to inhibit the press, we are investigating those issues and we're doing reporting. We're using the tools of journalism to publish on our website and harness the power of the media and the public at large to promote press freedom and to ensure that those attacks on the press do not go unnoted. And that evidence body that we're constantly publishing on a day-to-day basis then serves our advocacy when we engage with governments, when we engage with the UN, when we engage with other centers of power to try and change laws, free journalists, push for investigations when journalists are attacked. And it also lays the groundwork for our emergency response work, where we share resources with journalists freely available on our website, which is cpj.org, and do direct assistance for journalists in need, helping them evacuate a dangerous situation or get food or medicine if they're in jail. So this is the broad spectrum of our work. And, of course, we're looking at every country around the world, but Nigeria really is an important country because of its place in the region, because of its position globally, and because of its vibrant media sector, which unfortunately has had to deal with numerous issues over the years. I'll start with, go ahead.
No, I said great. Go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things that we've tracked for a long time is a real structural issue, laws that criminalize journalism. Wherever journalists are working, of course, they want to know that they can do their work without fear of arrest, without fear of being jailed, without fear of being criminalized and prosecuted in connection with that work. And unfortunately, in Nigeria, there are a number of laws that we've seen time and again used to criminalize the press. Chief among them is the Cybercrime Act, which, of course, dates back to 2015, and in particular, Section 24 of the Cybercrime Act, which is characterized as cyber stalking. But broadly, it has been used to criminalize online activity. And so because journalism in the modern era happens so much online, because outlets are looking to publish online as we are right now, this means that journalism that takes place in the medium that is most increasingly available to the public is also one where they can be targeted. And we've seen time and again over 20 journalists facing prosecution as recently as earlier this year for their work, being jailed and being dragged into court for their reporting. And of course, we also see even older laws, that the penal code in the north and the criminal code in the south have sections relating to criminal defamation, other anti-state allegations like breach of peace. These are the sort of laws that are being used to criminalize journalism for their reporting. And, this really is connected to a major issue, not just because of the sort of harassment of having to be dragged into court and face authorities and a judge, which of course disrupts reporting in general, but it also results too often in the jailing of journalists. And just last year, journalist Saint Mienpamo Onicha was arrested in October and spent 4 months in jail on cybercrime charges for his reporting, and was just released on bail earlier this month. But of course, that case continues to hang over him. And this sort of criminalization is a major issue, but it comes alongside other sorts of issues like attacks on journalists, direct violence against reporters when they're in the field, when they're trying to do their work, when they're trying to deliver the public information to be informed, to go about their daily lives, to make decisions about politics, to make decisions about their health. We know how important journalists were and continue to be in the context of the global pandemic. This sort of violence against journalists that we see, particularly in moments of political tension like protests or elections, is a real major concern.
And I'm so sorry to talk over you, but let me just quickly butt in there. But all of the things that you've reeled out, because I could give you more names to add to the list, but if you were to be stopped by someone, if you said you were doing stuff in Nigeria and someone said to you or asked a question, how well protected do you think the average Nigerian is? What would your response be? Nigerian journalist.
Well, journalists in Nigeria, it must be said, journalism in Nigeria is very vibrant. Civil society in Nigeria is very vibrant. It's impressive the way that civil society and the media fraternity at large have come together to defend themselves. When journalists are jailed, we do hear, the press freedom organizations across the country coming together to respond. They have been effective in pushing for change. We see lawsuits, legal organizations, lawyers standing up for journalists, defending them in court, taking the government to court with respect to these laws, pushing for the change at the structural level and at the individual level to make sure journalists have the defenses they need. But unfortunately, we are seeing pushback from government. We're not seeing follow through on lawsuits. There was a lawsuit that was from 2021 by Media Rights Agenda, a local press freedom group, that resulted in a ruling earlier this month where the government was directed to ensure accountability for attacks on the press and ensure that journalists are protected. We will see if there is follow through on that case. So there really are a lot of there's a lot of action to defend and protect journalists in Nigeria, but we are not seeing the political will from authorities, from those in power, matching that commitment from civil society.
What's the most case or the most outstanding case for you that you could remember off the top of your head about a Nigerian journalist who was severely persecuted, one that you've maybe as the CPJ had been directly involved with?
Yeah, a major case, of course, was one of Agba Jalingo, a journalist who was jailed for months, faced a raft of charges, including anti-state charges, cybercrime charges. He was jailed for months, around 8 months, if I remember correctly, then released and subsequently won a court case that said that imprisonment and that mistreatment in custody was unjust and was awarded damages. And that was last year, and we're still waiting to see that judgment fulfilled. The political will to follow through on that judgment is yet to be seen. And so, his case is emblematic of a number of issues: the jailing of a journalist for a prolonged period, the criminalization of journalism broadly using laws that we see used time and again, the mistreatment in custody, and then when the civil society and when those who defend the press came to pursue accountability for that mistreatment, so far, authorities ignoring a ruling that offers him some modicum of justice in response.
Let's quickly talk about the CPJ again here. When you talk about protection, what sort of protection do you offer me? For example, I could be what some Nigerians would term a coconut head, in terms of I'm always going to keep dragging until I get something out of it. I'll keep squeezing, and for most people that's a bit dangerous, and that could be detailed for a couple of us other journalists who are on air. What sort of protection does the CPJ offer, especially for Nigerians journalists in Nigeria? I mean, you saw what happened during NSAS. You've seen what's happened to some journalists who print stories or bring exposés about people who are highly placed and the threats that they face. What sort of protection do you offer?
It's an important question. It's one that we grapple with every day, the best way to try and protect journalists in a given context. And it really comes back to those sort of three pillars that I mentioned at the top of the program. We're looking to document the concerns, to make sure that there's an evidence base so that when you or I or anyone seeks to confront the authorities about a pattern of behavior or a specific law, there's a bedrock of solid information from which we can speak authoritatively on what needs to happen, the ways that laws are being used, the concerning things we're seeing. That's the crucial thing, is that we need to move from a position of informed evidence, which we have extensive documentation on our website on Nigeria. So for anyone looking to do advocacy or improve the conditions in Nigeria, that evidence is there for them. And then, of course, we're in the course of reporting, we're calling authorities that are related to the given case. So when we hear about an incident where a journalist is attacked, perhaps by a police officer, we're calling that officer or the commanding officer or the spokesperson for the police to ask for comment on the behavior that we're seeing. And this, of course, just like in the best way that journalism can, holds power to account, has those with power and those who wield it in irresponsible ways. It puts them on notice that people are watching, that this sort of accountability is going to be pursued. And then in the more immediate term, we are trying to give journalists the information that they need so that they can be out in the field as safely as possible. We have very specific guides on our website, again, cpj.org, relating to physical security, relating to situational awareness and coverage of very specific incidents like protests or elections. We offer checklists for editors so that they, when they're planning coverage for the reporters in their newsroom, can go through and make sure that there's a plan in place given the dangers of the particular situation. We're offering journalists very specific and detailed guidance on particular digital threats, ways to respond to internet shutdowns. A whole raft of concerns that we're seeing in our documentation are informing the information that we're offering to journalists on our website. But really, again, we are trying to come at this from every angle possible, giving journalists the tools they need to be as safe as possible, but of course, trying to just broadly improve the conditions so that it's not all on the journalists themselves. The authorities that are responsible for the safety of the public, of which, of course, journalists are members, need to be involved as well.
I've got so many questions to ask you. I mean, I wish I had all day so we could just go on and on and on. But you briefly answered the question I just wanted to ask before we go on a break. I've got 30 seconds, but let's see. Training and retraining is very necessary, because you talked about tools, arming people with the necessary, because we also live in a time and a day where everyone thinks they're journalists. They want to break stories. They want to put out whatever information they have without following the rules, and doing it within the ambits of the law and the ethics of broadcast journalism or journalism in itself. How much or how extensive have you gone with this training and arming of these journalists with those tools and information that will help them in telling their stories or doing their work without getting caught in the web of I told you so by politicians or the powers that be?
Right. So CPJ broadly is not a training organization. We do one-on-one consultations with journalists in need, but we have partners that are doing these sort of have as their core mandate to do trainings. But we do try and, of course, give journalists the tools they need as much as we can. With this being said, and just speaking to the idea of responsible journalism, we're always encouraging responsible journalism. The best journalism is done with, the highest quality craft, and that's oftentimes a very good defense. But of course, we're seeing time and again that it is the journalists that work on sort of the margins of established media that are doing some of the most adversarial reporting. And
Jonathan, I'm so sorry, I have to stop you. We have to go on a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more. Stay with us. It's still Hard Facts.
The round of 16 of Nigeria Info's I Beg to Differ debate competition ends on Thursday. At 4 o'clock, Adekbetu Adenike and Babalola Deborah Toluwalokwe will debate the topic. Banning single-use plastic products will hurt the local economy. At 5 o'clock, Ifeanyi Blessing and Mushafau Farida face each other on the topic. Youths under 35 should be prohibited from relocating abroad. I am Yvonne Okhaifo. Join Femi Obang-Daniels and me as the judges pick the last two debaters for this round to join the quarterfinals. I Beg to Differ Season 7. 32 debaters, now 16. One winner, 1 million naira. Sponsored by May Brands, supported by Obiwizi and Just Food. For sponsorship, send an email to info@nigeriainfo.fm. I Beg to Differ, a tournament of champions.
Can you earn in dollars exporting everyday items to the USA? Yes, you can. Join me, Unduka Ude, and my export team at the Export to Wealth Conference on the 6th and 7th of March at the Oriental Hotel VI and learn the practical steps needed to find buyers abroad, sell on Amazon and other stores so you can start earning in dollars. To register, go to exportandsell.com/event or call us at 0909-344-7596. In partnership with Sterling Bank, you can get access to funding with single-digit interest rate that can help you expand and transform your business. To register, go to exportandsell.com/event or call us at 0909-344-7596. Go to exportandsell.com/event or call us at 0909-344-7596. See you soon.
Boniface, my guy. Long time no see. Why your face this strong kakaraka like this now?
Polinus, I beg this 2024. I want make money. I must buy car and house this year like you.
Boniface, last year, remember say I invite you for forex trading with my broker, Squared Financial. But that's also excuse for your mouth. See this here, take John, follow who sabi road.
Polinus, how Squared Financial go help me?
Them go teach you how to trade manually or automatic. Now you go choose.
Now automatic trading I go follow.
You like easy life, Sha?
Who no like better thing?
Oh yeah, call Squared Financial now on 0904-859-9688. No make mistake. 0904-856-9688 or visit their website www.sqfin.com.
The round of 16 of Nigeria Info's I Beg to Differ debate competition ends on Thursday. At 4 o'clock, Adekbetu Adenike and Babalola Deborah Toluwalokwe will debate the topic. Banning single-use plastic products will hurt the local economy. At 5 o'clock, Ifeanyi Blessing and Mushafau Farida face each other on the topic. Youths under 35 should be prohibited from relocating abroad. I am Yvonne Okhaifo. Join Femi Obang-Daniels and me as the judges pick the last two debaters for this round to join the quarterfinals. I Beg to Differ Season 7. 32 debaters, now 16. One winner, 1 million naira. Sponsored by May Brands, supported by Obiwizi and Just Food. For sponsorship, send an email to info@nigeriainfo.fm. I Beg to Differ, a tournament of champions.
Listening to your number one station for talk.
Your number one station for talk.
99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.
There's a reason why over 1 million people tune into Hard Facts every day. We discuss in-depth stories with sources behind the facts.
The Lagos State High Court sitting in Tafawa Balewa Square has
Chicago certificate story is never going away, is it? Show with stories for the day.
You hear diverse voices and opinions.
And she was meeting campaign with her husband, knowing that.
You should not feel happy because there is nothing to happy about.
Yeah, it's quite pathetic the way the country is going.
We distinguish each story accurately with analysis.
It's Hard Facts with Maryann Okon on 99.3 Nigeria Info.
All right, we're back. It's still Hard Facts, the nation's #1 talk news and sports radio station, 99.3 Nigeria Info. And my name is Maryann Okon. I still have joining me live via Zoom, Jonathan Rozen. He is Senior Researcher, Africa Program Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ. Jonathan, thank you so much for staying with us and having this conversation, very important conversation with us. So in the next 12 minutes, because I know a lot of people want to be part of the conversation and ask a few questions, but let's talk about journalism on the African scene. The first time I ever went as a guest of the U.S. State Department to the United States, the first question I was asked was, have you been arrested before? Because, of course, they think that if you're this outspoken as an African journalist and you are the way you are, then, of course, you know, you will obviously have issues with the government of the day or whatever it is. How do you think that the African continent has embraced and protected journalism?
You know, the question about whether or not you've been arrested is one, you know, that unfortunately a lot of journalists across the continent would have to say yes to. Every year, CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, does a census of every journalist in jail around the world in connection with their work. And that census date is December 1st. It's a snapshot. We've been doing this and collecting this data every year since 1992. And last year, 2023, we documented 47 journalists in jail across sub-Saharan Africa. This is up from 31 in 2022 and really showcases how broad an issue and how persistent an issue the criminalization of journalism is. And on that list of countries where journalists are in jail, we have one of the worst jailers of journalists in the world, Eritrea, with 16 journalists in jail. Many of those have been in jail since the early 2000s, many since 2001, which is, you know, an astonishing period of time to be in jail. Here we are in now 2024. Behind Eritrea is Ethiopia with 8 journalists. Those jailings came in the context of the conflict in the Amhara region. Behind that, Cameroon with 6 journalists, many of which have been in jail since 2016, prolonged detentions, many pretrial detentions, a lack of due process there, a consistent jailer of journalists, a country where journalists work in fear not only of violence but of arrest. But fourth, behind those countries where we've seen journalists jailed time and again is Senegal with 5 journalists in jail, all arrested last year, and the 5 that are in jail still, even as the political crisis in Senegal continues to unfold. You know, they were arrested in the context of arrests that took place more broadly of journalists that have been released. But really, this is a real dramatic shift for a country that was known as a stable democracy in the region to be jailing 5 journalists, to be 4th among the 11 countries with journalists jailed. I could go down the list: Rwanda, Togo, Burundi, and Nigeria with Saint Nyampamo Onitsha in jail on December 1st last year. Also appearing on that list.
I'm most concerned with censorship because, you know, many of us would say that we borrow our media sense from the likes of the US and the UK. But in this case, there seems to be a lot of censorship, just like in the countries that you've mentioned, Uganda, Zimbabwe. I mean, the list is endless. Some governments, you know, even, for example, in Nigeria, most the most owned media houses are owned by the government. And so there's a lot of censorship, and systematically, this is a tool to, silence the media. So if you've given us this list of a lot of people being arrested, then does it mean that there's no press freedom on the African continent?
No, I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that journalists doing the work to inform the public, face consistent threats, and they're unfortunately familiar. This criminalization of journalism, this lack of accountability when there's violence against the press, and censorship is the word that we're talking about here. When you worry that you'll be arrested for something that the public should be informed about and want to publish or broadcast about, that's a concern. That's a chilling effect. When you worry about the threat of violence when you go out on the field from security forces that have a mandate to protect you, that has a chilling effect, and that has a censorious implication. And ultimately, what we're talking about here is, of course, the individual cases of all of these journalists, but the broad impact as well on the public, on the right to know, on the ability to hold those with power to account, on the ability to be informed on a day-to-day basis as we all move through our lives.
I want to quickly, in the next 2 minutes, talk about what's happening in Gaza. I took a pip at your page last night, and I saw details of, the number of people, especially journalists, who've died in Gaza. I first started keeping, tabs on it, but now I've lost count. Talk to me about the people who've died in the line of duty in Gaza, especially the journalists.
I mean, the situation in Gaza is tragic. It's catastrophic. It is the most intense period of killings of journalists that we've ever documented. And the numbers are constantly changing. The team that covers the Middle East here at CPJ is doing extraordinary work to try and stay on top of these details, which are oftentimes very difficult to pin down, in light of communications blackouts, in light of the lack of access, the Israeli government not permitting journalists to access Gaza. We've documented 94 journalists and media workers that have been killed in the course of this war, 89 of them Palestinian, 2 Israelis and 3 Lebanese. Again, this is just an unprecedented number of killings of journalists. But we're also documenting arrests and detentions. That prison census that I mentioned documented 16 journalists in jail, all of which were arrested from the West Bank, actually, and being held in what's called administrative detention without full due process. So there's a broad spectrum of concerns that are connected to this war for the press. But of course, chief among them is this just unprecedented level of death.
With all that's been said, because I want to open up the phone lines, can we be considered an endangered species of sorts? And what must we do more to protect ourselves? Because I remember in 2020, in the hit of COVID, I did talk to my professor back in New York, and he said something about reporting a story that is very sensitive. If you know that it's too hot for you to report, find someone else who can do it without taking you taking the hit. Because he said something more like, "Don't be stupid. You need to stay alive so you can tell more stories." But how do we protect ourselves, and are we that endangered?
Well, safety of journalists is the priority. We're all looking to report important information that holds power to account. But of course, the safety is the priority. And it's certainly the priority for us on a day-to-day basis as we try and give journalists the tools they need to report. But broadly, we need solidarity around the world. Conversations like the one we're having today, raising the awareness of these concerns that are impacting the public at large. Press freedom is your freedom. It's my freedom. It's the ability to have the tools and the information to make basic everyday decisions. And this is something that we all deserve. This is something that we all need. And so it's a difficult question about whether or not journalists are endangered, but they're certainly under threat. And there's a lot of solidarity across the continent and around the world with the press. And that we've seen time and again can have an impact in holding authorities to account, in pushing for decision-making and different legislation to improve the conditions for journalists.
Well, Jonathan Rozen is from CPJ. Before I let him go, I see the phone lines are blinking. If you want to ask questions, you want to comment, join the conversation. If you're a journalist and you're listening and you'd like to chime in, please join the conversation. 0700 993 993 993. I've got 3 minutes on the clock, 3 lucky numbers. 0700 993 993 993. If you're listening from outside of the country, you can be part of the conversation. Join us via Skype. We're live on Skype. We are Nigeria Info FM via Skype. So go ahead, join the conversation. If you're a lady, call 01-465-7190. That's 0201-465-7190. Hello, welcome to Hard Facts.
Good afternoon, Maryann.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to your guest as well.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Welcome to Hard Facts, Maryann.
Yes, thank you.
All right, my question would be to your guest. I've seen renowned journalists cover and bow and hide in recent times because of fear for their life. They either underreport or they don't even do the job at all. And if they have an interview with a politician, they would rather vet questions for fear as well. I want him to please admonish or encourage them this afternoon. What can they do? Because journalism is a honorable profession.
Okay.
Thanks and God bless.
All right, thank you very much. Fortunately, I don't have too much time to take more calls. Jonathan, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, journalists are making decisions every day on how they're going to cover stories. Safety is obviously a consideration as they go through their work. We are always trying to give journalists the tools that they need to feel like they can do that job safely, to feel like they don't have to self-censor. But we also need to be placing the onus on authorities to create the conditions so that journalists don't worry about what will happen if they ask the wrong question. We need to be pushing for that political will to be placed with those who have power to create these conditions, to change those laws, to curb the intimidation that we're seeing, far too often.
Jonathan, I want to thank you very much for being part of the conversation today. There could be no better time to have these kinds of conversations, whether we like it or not. It's very timely. But I just want to read one quick message. Someone says, 67 journalists gone like that. It's very heartbreaking and horrifying, he says, sending thoughts of strength and healing to all journalists, dead or alive. The world must not turn a blind eye to these atrocities. And someone says, it's very unfortunate for those people who see these killings of journalists as right and just. And it happens all over the world. The journalists are the light of the world. They are the ones who are lighting the path for ordinary people to see what's going on in their various societies. Journalists deserve to be protected and given special treatment whenever they're doing their jobs. And he says, may the souls of the departed journalists rest in peace. Alaba Alakwe, thank you. Well, Jonathan is the Senior Researcher, Africa Program Afrique, Committee to Protect Journalists, that's CPJ. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Jonathan, and keep up the great work.
Thank you for having me, and you as well.
All right, thank you. Well, Lagos, there you have it. It's time for me to step aside. But before I do that, Total Energies has some information for you. And David is joining me live in the studio to be part of this conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. My name is Maryann Okon.
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.